The views and opinions expressed on the episode belong to the speakers and do not represent the views or positions of any entity that they represent.
Hello and welcome to Educators Commune Conversations. Joining me today are Chopra and Sonali Saini. And our conversation today will explore and build on the many possibilities of play and learning that become accessible to children with disabilities with small yet significant mindset shifts. Welcome to the podcast, Joe and Sonali. Let's begin with a round of introductions. So can I ask you, Joe, first, and then Sonali, to introduce yourselves, your organizations, and your role within the organization as well.
Sure, thank you. My name is Chopra McGowan. I'm an American, but I've been living in India for the last 43 years now, married to an Indian, and we had 3 children. And our youngest daughter, Moi Moi, was disabled. And it was for her that I really found my calling in life, my purpose for being here. And I started an organization called Latika, which used to be called Latika Roy Foundation. Now we're just Latika. We provide a whole wide range of services for kids with disabilities, including young adults. And one of the most important parts of what we do is the fun stuff, the inclusive club for children and the club for adults, where we really look at just having a good time. What are the things that disabled children like to do with each other and with other kids? So the inclusive club is really special because of the way that disabled and typical kids get to hang out with each other and have fun together and learn to accept all sorts of differences. And the club for disabled adults is also very special because it's just for the disabled adult. And it's a recognition that they have their own desires about friendship and what brings meaning to their lives and how they want to behave without any apologies or worries about how other people are accepting them or not. So it's a special spot for them. And we've learned so much in the process of building these 2 entities. And that's been the hallmark of Latika's growth, is that we're constantly learning from the children and the adults and their families. And my role in the organization is the founder director, and we're about 120 staff now, and we work with over 400 children every day.
Thank you, Joe. Sonali, can we hear from you?
Yeah, hi, I'm Sonali Saini. I'm the founder of an organization called Soul's Arc. We've been working in the same space since the last 20 years. But in many different avatars. We started for about almost a decade. We worked directly through a center-based model, similar to what Joe described, where we provided therapies, we provided educational interventions for children with disabilities, children who had large learning challenges. And that shifted in 2016 for us. We I think understood that at least as an organization, we face challenges of what's going to happen to our children as they move out from the center, and realize that maybe the shift needs to happen in the ecosystem rather than just the individuals. So that's where we shifted our model and started working first with many mainstream NGOs, and figuring out what inclusion looks like in India. India has some of the most advanced inclusion policies, but when it comes to implementation, we really lack implementation. So while children are admitted in school, especially government schools, they're definitely admitted, but their learning is not catered to the accessibility to learning, accessibility to infrastructure, making sure that the teachers understand the children, their needs, they get the right support is something that is completely missing. We kind of set out to figure out for ourselves first what that model looks like, because we don't have if you compare the work that we do and compare the kind of models that exist in developed countries, you'll realize that it's a very high resource model. And the kind of schools and the kind of classrooms we have in India, especially in government schools, you can't even think of having a crayon. Forget assistive devices and forget all these aids appliances that that can aid, that actually help the children in the class. So we set out to kind of figure out what does this inclusion look like in a country like India, and the classrooms that we have for majority of the population who is the most vulnerable, who cannot afford private services, who cannot afford private schools, or even centers for that matter, which are completely inaccessible to them. So that's where we shifted our journey, started working with NGOs, now working with three state governments. We work with Madhya Pradesh, Tamil Nadu, and now just signed up with UP. These are the three states that we work in through our education program. We also simultaneously, because another worry that we had is what's going to happen to our children when they move out or when they complete their education, whether it's 10th standard or 12th standard, what's the scope ahead? And that's another big, vast area which is completely missing from our system. So while many of them run courses, they're not really sector specified, or they're not certified by sector councils, or not certified or recognized by the industry. And therefore, how do you kind of standardize this process? How do you make sure that our young adults get the same opportunities? That's when we started our urban employment model. We worked with about 350 young adults. We've placed about 83 young adults so far in through the program. They are completely, and this is specifically for individuals with autism and intellectual disabilities, not for others. We also shifted to then a rural livelihood program, because we work with state governments and 70% of them are in rural areas. And we just started building it about 2 years ago. Shown good results. We have an understanding of what that model looks like. And now we've just signed up with the government of Meghalaya to implement the program at state. So that's been our journey.
And Sonali, do you want to elaborate on your role, as in what are you managing with all these programs you've just spoken about?
I think, just like Joe, I'm sure you manage everything and anything. It's just everything on the plate. I'm the founding director, but I don't think there is, while we have a fantastic team, I think it's everywhere. Whoever's not there, I'm the replacement. So it's managing the organization. And a lot of my work has been in pedagogy. So a lot of inputs in developing inclusive pedagogy, because that's not a field anybody teaches. That's not something anyone teaches in terms of how do you develop inclusive pedagogy, how do you develop inclusive curriculum, how do you align it to what the state curriculums are, what the state frameworks are. So that's kind of been a passion for me, and a lot of inputs for me, for the team kind of happen in that area.
Thank you. And so picking up from what you said, so Joe, you started because of because of your daughter, like you said, and Sonali, for you said that, like, slowly from working with children, now you've moved on to working with adults, and both of you spoke about uh, creating spaces where they interact safely with others in the society. And we are, I think, largely aware about the commonly held negative views of disability, and at the same time we're not lacking in examples where there's been excellence in skills and competence, and even inspiration that individuals with disabilities have shown us. Like I was just telling you, Joe, before we started recording, the Paralympics has been very big example, with India winning 29 medals. And so we can just, like, talk about why is it so important for us to give inclusion the kind of space it deserves, especially if you're looking to create a society which benefits not only those who face the challenges, but also the ones who are interacting with them. So how do we begin to look at a society where we have to give inclusion the kind of importance it deserves?
I'd love to respond to the challenge that the Paralympics has thrown at us, because it's such a perfect example of what other things can flourish when we stop looking at academics as the only road to success. And so many children who would be brilliant at sports are never given the opportunity because their parents are so focused on them doing well in maths and science and getting into IIT, even knowing that the chances of that happening are like minuscule. Where if we focused on so many other aspects of the human experience. We would be giving children such a wide canvas. And that is actually what happens with disability, because whatever the disability is, it depends. But for a lot of our kids, achieving intellectual glamour and great heights is not going to happen. And so parents very quickly make that switch over, and they're okay to do it with their disabled child because somehow the rules are different, and they're once they get over the trauma of getting a diagnosis, they start to be more creative in how they work with this child. So they're not so focused on a regular school routine. They may have people who come in and work with the kid for music or for dance, and so they try and find those other talents and things that the children find joy in. And we've had so many kids who have done well in the Special Olympics and the Paralympics, and it's because they've got so much potential that isn't getting wasted in something they're not good at. And I think India could learn so much. 29 gold medals in the Paralympics, and how many did we get in the regular Olympics? I can't even remember. It was what? Did we get any gold? I don't think so. And so that is what a brilliant lesson. And thank you for bringing it up, because I'm going to write an article about it now. It's such a great idea.
Yeah, I think Joe spoke about exploring, looking at education, or looking at the way we learn in a very holistic manner, right? And when it comes to disability, we always feel that, or there's always this framework that we say that, oh, children with disability will be able to learn this much, or children with physical disability will be able to do these things. And that is so far away from reality, right? I mean, you have individuals with physical disabilities who've climbed Mount Everest. You have the Paralympics, where you can see amazing feats that they've accomplished. So to define somebody by their disability, I think is just criminal. We have to figure out how we can look beyond this disability and look at diversity rather than the disability, right? I mean, in your regular class, are all the children same? If they're not, it's the same for individuals with disability. They're not, nobody's the same, right? Everyone is their own unique person. And the day we recognize that, I think it's easier then to set your expectations, because you're recognizing that everyone has a different ability. It's not common. It's not something that you can measure in the same way across. So I think that's very, very important, to think of how diversity can be addressed rather than disability. And for every child, it's not just for children with disability. And that's how learning should be. That's how education should be.
Yeah, and I feel like the thing that is so beautiful about disability and inclusive education is how it opens whole new avenues for all the kids. That if we get these kids into the mainstream class and the teacher realizes that this child isn't learning this way, and so she starts introducing new concepts, new approaches, new strategies, automatically all the kids benefit by it. It's just that's how it works, because we have so many ways to process information, to take in new experiences. And it's not all just auditory, like the teacher standing there in the front of the class and talking or writing things on the board. Those are good ways. And a lot of us learn very well that way, but a lot of us will learn much better by getting up and moving, or by doing something artistic, or with our hands, or acting something out, or singing. And there are just a million ways. And teachers, like Sonali can attest to this, have got such a bag of tricks, and they're not allowed to bring them out. They're like, no, we do it by this syllabus, and this isn't in the course. You don't need to talk about that right now. And why are we limiting our kids? They're so capacious. They have so many things that they can acquire and make their own, and we're preventing it from happening. So I love when disabled kids get into a mainstream class, because opens the doors for so many other things to happen.
Two very significant points stood out. One, Joe, when you mentioned that when a parent or a caregiver has to face that moment where they realize that, there's a diagnosis that's come through and it says that my child has a disability. So that's a moment of deep trauma for them. And Sonali also, and both you, Joe, also, as you mentioned, that the limitations that are imposed on the children, they're not by the children themselves, they're by those around the children, that they are the ones who think what the child can and cannot, or will be able to, or will not be able to do. So I just wanted to talk about what are some of these mindsets and attitudes that you've come across, of caregivers as they realize that the child has a disability, and if there is, in being able to accept and move on from there to see what else for my child. In that shift, does caste and a class play a role as well?
You want to take that one, Sonali, first, and I can come in on it?
Uh, sure, sure. Um, so I think one is, attitudes in general in terms of the way we look at individuals with disabilities, and we already spoke a lot about that. We were recently doing, trying to put together some materials for one of the trainings that we're doing, and we were pulling down all the vocabulary that we use for individuals with disabilities, and the right vocabulary and the right way. And there was something very interesting we read where we are talking about differently abled children, right? This is another term that is used. And the question there really was, aren't we all differently abled? Right? I mean, we all, so therefore, to the attitude around being different is has negative connotations for some reason. And while if you see in real life, if you are different, you stand out, you achieve so much more if with those differences rather than being the same. So I think when it comes to attitudes, there are simple examples, and I can tell you a lot more about the challenges that we face with teachers, where the first, I think, thing is around pity. So the first attitude is, oh, this child is in my, and the responsibility of this child lies with somebody else. It's either the parent or it's the special educator. But there are also a lot of teachers who want to do something but don't know how to, right? So you have a whole range of people. The same thing with parents, the same thing with teachers, in terms of what they want to do with the child, or what their willingness is to work with that child, right? So I think when we talk to teachers, we avoid using jargon, and so we speak like this, right? What is differently abled? Are you thinking of the last child in your classroom? So instead of saying, are you thinking of the child with disability in your classroom, the question that we ask the teachers is every last child in your class learning, right? And that's the question, therefore, that equates all children together, that there are many children who are not learning with or without a disability. So a lot of attitude change also comes in with the right vocabulary, and what is it that the person, whether it's the parent or whether it's the teacher, what is it that they really understand as a language, rather than giving a lot of jargon around the way we speak about disability. I think we've learned that a hard way. I mean, being an organization, being in the sector, we just use jargon, and every third word is a jargon, and then we wonder why people are not changing attitudes and relating to this, because nobody understands what you're saying. So yeah, I mean, I think that's been a huge learning for us in terms of attitude change. I think we need to change our attitudes as professionals too, before we go out and advocate or propagate what we want to with teachers or parents.
One of the experiences that we have had, and it's really been very prevalent in this last year, because we're building a building, and we are questioning every single aspect of the building and how it's going to work for everybody who comes to use it. And in the process, we have discovered a lot of fascinating literature about architecture and how spaces can transform people's reality, and how many barriers we have put in people's way, physical barriers, but then that takes you to another level of thinking. What are the mental barriers that I put in the way of a person becoming their best self? And with the building, we're thinking about how ingeniously disabled people confront the built world, how they maneuver when they have no option but to figure it out, to think of, okay, I've got to do this my way because this world is built for you and me. We can walk, we can use both our hands, we can see, we can hear. So how does a disabled person navigate this world? And we see it in India all the time. And it's so inspiring and compelling to look at like a kid on a little wheeled platform scooting across the railway platform and getting from A to Z and doing things that other people would find too daunting, couldn't do that, but they manage. They run and get fruit, and then they wheel themselves down. And we look at them and we feel, oh my God, bichara. But that kid is like so innovative and so clever and so dauntless. You know, they could do anything. They just like, because the barriers are almost like a challenge to them. I'm going to get through that. I'm going to figure that out. How am I going to get up the stairs? How am I going to get across this chasm that's in my way? And their minds just have to work differently. And it's the same as what we're talking about in the classrooms, that when the teacher, who's a genuine teacher, who really wants to reach every child in that room, like Sonali said, is every kid learning, every last kid learning? Not all teachers are inspired, but many are, and they will figure out ways to communicate. I saw a school in Himachal Pradesh, little village school, and there was a kid who was deaf, and the teacher, who had no background in sign language, had worked it out how she could communicate with this child. The other children were like streaks ahead of the teacher because they're kids, you know, and they have no hang-ups about how it looks and how they seem. So they were having regular conversations. She could communicate what she needed for the kid to know. The other kids were like at it, and they had invented their own sign language. They had a kid with a severe deformity of the face. I mean, it was hideous to look at. This child had only one eye. His face was all smashed and contorted, and he was born that way. And the principal had an assembly with the kids before this child joined, and she said that a child who looks different from all of us is going to be coming. He's had a very hard time in his other class, his other school, and we are going to make him feel welcome. And it was that attitude of confidence in the children and clear expectations that this is what we're going to do. And that child, it's such a beautiful thing. You can see it on YouTube if you want to. It's a school called Gumru, and just look for the video that's about a half an hour long. And this element comes in about halfway through. And this kid is just like any other child. He's chatting with the other kids. He's laughing with the other kids. There's no awareness on their part, or they don't show it, that they think he looks weird. And it's quite like startling to look at it the first time. Now when I see him, I've seen that video so many times, I'm also full of affection for him. But it was the two things, the teacher's, the principal's expectation and her clear confidence that the kids could do this. So we're all capable of making things happen, of overcoming obstacles, and having a world that is accepting and recognizing that there are so many ways to approach the world. And when we can learn from each other and stop thinking about people being objects of pity, but interesting people with their own perspective on things, that's when we really start to have the fun.
Is there any anecdote you want to specifically share which brings out the caste or the class angle? Something that comes to mind?
Caste class, you're very focused on that.
No, I'm just asking because I wasn't sure whether that tied into, say, you know, how open, whether it tied into the mindset is what I was trying to inquire into,
I
or not
think
necessarily.
No, I think it varies a lot. You know, there are classes, there are castes, but within that, there are all those crazy different people, and they're all going to approach it in their own way. Some upper caste people are fine. They can accept that they've got a disabled child, they can move on and make it work. And some are very rigid. But the same is true in the lower castes. I think for disability, if you are a low caste person, you're going to have a harder time for sure, because that's just the way the society works. And you've got this, you're a woman, you're a Dalit, you are disabled, you have dark skin. The more you rack those up, the worse it's going to be for you. But I don't really think that you can generalize on any caste or any class or any religion. I don't think, but I'm not an expert. Sonali, I don't know what you think.
Yeah, I have not seen that either. But what I've seen is a lot of regional differences. So in Gujarat, where we work in a village called Mujkawa, where we, built a rural livelihood model, and every person, every family with a child with disability and without a disability had very, very open views, very, very, they were very accepting of individuals with disabilities. So some of the questions in our surveys are typically, are these individuals invited to marriages? Are they invited to social beings? So because we wanted to understand the social isolation that they face, and none of that was true in that village. So it's very, very different. I think regionally, it's very different. What I've seen very strangely is that extremely educated parents find it very difficult to accept children with disabilities versus somebody who is not as literate to accept disability. I think I don't. Maybe I don't know what the reason is, but I've seen especially doctors, engineers, and these parents find it extremely difficult to accept that their child has a disability. And I don't know if Joe, you've seen this, but I've seen this a lot over years.
Yeah, I have
You
seen that too, to be
yeah,
fair. And I think that it has to do with how they value themselves for their qualifications, their capacities, their achievements, and to be confronted with a child who doesn't fit those particular um, definitions of success is tough. And it's a lot of those parents waste a lot of the best years trying to find a solution that is academic, that is well, he understands everything, he just can't express it. And they never will accept that he actually needs a tool to communicate, because he can learn to talk. I know he can learn to talk. And so that those often, for people with very high achievement levels for themselves and their other children, it takes longer, I find. And
it's almost
then
like my child. How can my child
my
have
child,
this kind? My child have a disability. So it's almost
yeah,
like a
so
reflection.
it's shame.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a kind of, and they're dealing with all of their status, and and we do see people who hide those children, and who they treat them very, very well. They're great clothes, but they don't come out much, and they don't have friends, and they are very lonely. So I think in some ways the poor are more accepting. They have more, but they're burdened more by the whole situation.
I've also seen a difference in communities, right? So there are certain communities where disability is more common because of consanguineous marriages, for example. So
Mm.
Muslim community, for example, you'll have a larger percentage of children with disabilities because they marry within the family, and a lot more acceptance there because almost every family has somebody with disability somewhere, and therefore, and also the belief that okay, this is given by God, and therefore larger acceptance for children with disabilities that I've seen in certain communities. Just
Catholics also.
yeah,
I'm a
sorry,
Catholic. Catholics.
Catholics also. Yes, yes.
Catholics, because we have such large families, and then women are having babies into their 40s. And so Down syndrome is very common in Catholic families. And it's very accepted. It's like this is, it's changed now because the new generation is finally taking birth control. But when I was growing up, I used to know so many families who had kids with Down syndrome. I think in our immediate block there were three families. One had 12 kids. The second youngest had Down syndrome. One had, it was just like these huge families, and it's not surprising, but it was very accepted also.
And so, I mean, you brought examples like, Joe, you said that principal who very clearly said that we are going to make this child feel like he's a part of the school. And you could see how the school opened up for that boy as a safe space to be, and to learn and to make friends and do everything that a school going child does. And so I like building on from there. I just want to know that once these shifts are made, how can you share examples of how play and learning becomes accessible? And 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 like you said, it was just just a single conversation that it needed for the child to feel welcomed and a part of the space. So and if you can share examples of what are these small things that make significant differences to children in their play, in places where they play, in places where they learn. And yeah.
So at Latika Vihar, which is our inclusive club, the way that games are set up, activities are set up, performances are set up, it's just organized in a way that participation rather than winning is the goal. And it's designed in such a way that every child can participate. We don't have like traditional races or things that make it very clear that some kids are much better than others. One of the examples, and so let me just first say that with that kind of a basis, lots of disabled kids started coming. It was like word of mouth in the early days. We didn't have any particular outreach to disabled kids. It was just they heard about it, and parents started bringing their kids because other places the kids weren't welcome. And this was going back 30 years. So things have changed a lot. But even now I hear from families that this is the only place they can bring their kids to play. They can't go to parks. Other people get spooked or worried, or they don't let their children play with them. The best example of this happened with a family that came to visit a friend of theirs who was on our staff. They had 2 children with autism. These people lived in Meerut, outside of Delhi. And they came in, and we just happened to be having a function. We were releasing our annual calendar. So everybody was around, and there was a lot of cheerfulness, and all the Latika Vihar children were just beginning to arrive. And this couple stayed, and their kids went off and started playing with other kids. And afterwards, I came to meet them because I didn't recognize them. And I walked up and I introduced myself, and they said they were friends of Sabba's. And then they said, what's different about this place? How do you train these kids? And I said, well, this isn't anything to do with training. This is Latika Vihar. This is just a play center. So we don't train anybody. The kids just come and have fun. And the father said, but these children are very different from any other children I've seen. They're not staring at my kids. They're not pushing them away. They're not running away from them. And Sabha told me this later, and she said, I just said, no, but this is Latika Vihar. Everybody comes here and everybody's welcome. And that's just the vibe. And this family has actually moved to Dehradun so that they can bring their kids to have fun. He said that they never went out with them. They couldn't go to malls. They couldn't go to parks. They were not welcome at even their own relatives' birthday parties because the kids both have autism. They do have odd behaviors, but we are so used to odd behaviors that our typical kids don't think twice about it. It's just, well, that's just how they are, and that they just carry on. And so I think it's that same attitude that principal had, that the expectation is, of course, you're going to be friends with them. Of course, they're going to take part. Of course, they're going to be Latika Vihar kids. And I think kids just rise to expectations. And our children are not anything special, different from any other kids. They're just expected to do this, and they do. So I think there's a lot of hope in that that if we as adults can change our um, interactions with kids, not get, like now when I see a disabled kid, I'm sure you're like this too, Sonali. It's like, oh, one of ours. And I just am drawn to them naturally. Like I want to go and talk to them. And it's such a nice feeling that it also gives you the advantage that when you see somebody who's obviously normal but acting weird, you say, something going on there. I wonder what's happening today. I wonder why they're upset. I wonder what's like today we had a guest for lunch and my husband had invited him over and he didn't get a chance to brief me on him. Within seconds, I could see this guy had some issues. And, and it just changed the way I interacted with him, make sure that I drew him out and, you develop that skill that you can recognize when someone's having a hard time. And I think that's what we need in this world. There are so many people with so much inside them that they can't accept, and we just need to give them a place where they can be themselves.
I think I can think of a. mm, uh, so we, in our work with the government, we provide learning books for children with disabilities, and these books are completely aligned to what the rest of the children are doing. It's just following universal design for learning, and it's following certain inclusion principles. And these books were created, and in one of the districts where we work, which is in Velipuram in Tamil Nadu, there's this boy in the school who got that book and started really enjoying it because this was the first time he could actually do something in the book. Because for so many years, he was in grade 3, and for so many years, the book was just blank. And he loved that book so much that he would carry it around everywhere. And when one of our district coordinators went and asked the teacher to show us the book, and she called that boy and she said, okay, show me the book. And the teacher and the DC was talking, and this boy was just standing over there and saying, give my book back. Why are you discussing this without me? And it was just the most, it's such a small thing. It's not big things that make a difference. You don't have to have high tech devices in your classroom. It's just the little things which make a difference. And that's that for him, it was, this is something I can finally do. This was a book that I can finally, just like all my other friends, I'm also writing in this book and I'm enjoying it. He finished it in like 3 weeks. He just finished the whole book, and his teacher was amazed that he can do all this, because for the teacher, because he couldn't do what the other children were doing in their classroom, she felt this child can't learn at all. And she was so surprised to see that with the right material, this child is able to learn just as well, right? And that's the difference between giving something that's appropriate for you versus giving something that makes no sense to you at all. It's like somebody giving me a Chinese book and asking me to, read it or do something about it. It's the same thing. So I think, and it's those little things that are going to make the difference. It's little things in thinking about those little things. What's going to encourage a child to learn? It's not rocket science. It's just give them something that they can actually learn. Don't give them things which are so difficult or which are so inaccessible to them that they can't learn from. And if you keep this basic principle in mind, I don't think you need anybody to do it. Even a motivated teacher can do the same thing. It's just that the understanding for the teacher, like the teacher was surprised and she was talking to us so much that I never knew. 4 years this boy has been in my class and I never knew he could even hold a pencil, right? And that he's completed the books in these 3 works was a miracle for her. But it's really not a miracle. All it needed was to understand that children learn differently, and you need to, look at those differences. There are lots of things that have happened at the state level. Very, very motivated, one of the most motivated states. What they did is they when we started our program, we had this thing of what is mass awareness going to look like at an entire state with like 38 districts, right? So what they did is they we designed some programs for them, and the education minister on Children's Day took an oath where about inclusion, and this oath was shared by every teacher in the classroom. And uh, every Monday, even now, there is an oath on inclusion that the entire classroom takes. So it's these kind of things that change people's attitudes, and they understand that this is important for the state, this is important for everybody. So it's not just the teacher, but it's everybody who wants to do something, right? And the willingness comes through. Oh, the education minister is saying this, or my block officer is saying this, or my district collector is saying this. So that language, that, or the need to do something for children with special needs in their district, in their block, in their school, I think that need will only come when enough people push for it. Right? It's never going to be sufficient. And most of the times we've seen, especially in government schools, the parents have very little voice. So even looking at that, so one of the things that we did was making sure that in the SMC meetings there is an agenda about inclusion. Nobody talks about it, right? It's just generic topics, and you're not even talking. You're talking about a road that's coming to school, but are you talking about the accessibility of that road? So that's so critical to embed in the system, that you talk enough about it that it becomes a language. We always see inclusion is the first thing you think of, not the last thing. You can never solve for it if that's the last thing you've thought of. No solution can work, right? But if it's the first thing, then everything else will fall in place. So yeah, I mean, there are many stories like this which, you know, really motivate us. These are small changes. You're not going to see vast change. You're going to say, oh, this child has started now coming first in class, and you're not going to see those stories. But these little stories give you the hope and the motivation that yes, things are changing on the ground.
Something like the child is coming to school every day now, or that child is holding on to that book every day now. Those are your indicators for success, more than, oh, they won a first prize, or like whatever,
and the
gold
teacher
medal.
would sit, and the teacher would start sitting with the child in the break time, because she loved the fact that this child is doing something. And when she saw that, she actually started, not just during the class but even during the break time, because the child would come with the book to her, and she said, I don't know how to say no. I mean, how can I say no to a child who wants to learn, or who wants to do something? So it changes. He made her change, the way that she thought about it.
Joe, the story that you shared about the parent who came and was just surprised that, that every child was just themselves and they were all having fun. And never before had he come across such a space where there was such a possibility for every child to participate in. So, do you see that, when you move around the city and you see how playgrounds are set up or how toys are created? I mean, does it thought cross your mind that, oh, all they need to do is this and then it becomes accessible to everyone? Or all they need to look at is probably just, make that one small tweak or the one small change, and then here's a space that opens up for everyone?
I do think a lot about those things, and often it's a question of physical access, because there are so many wonderful spaces in our own neighborhood, for an example, of parks that many children can't get into. They have those cow gates, those roundabout cow gates. And okay, I understand they're trying to keep animals from coming in, but there's got to be a way to make sure that kids who have mobility issues can get in, that elderly people can get in, that moms with kids in prams can get in. And they're just, when you start building walls and putting barriers of any kind, and those barriers that are physical, train your mind to think along a different path. And I think for us, building this building has opened our minds in ways that we were not expecting at all. Just for another example, we are going to have the most magnificent ramp in this building. It is like incredible, because we wanted everybody in the building, to be safe, that in an emergency, we are going to have 2 lifts, but you can't use the lifts if it's a fire or something like that. So there's got to be a way that nobody is left behind. So this huge ramp is going to go right up to the terrace. And that's like the 3rd floor. So the ramp, if you can imagine, because you have to do it according to the code, the National Building Code, the slope has to be 1:20. So that's a very, very gradual slope. So that means it has to be really like the number of times it has to go around and back on itself is phenomenal. Very expensive piece of architecture. But we're building this, and I'm thinking, I hope people are actually going to use it. I've seen a lot of ramps that, because there's a lift, people prefer the lift and they never bother. It takes longer. And then I thought, wow, what we could do? This neighborhood that we're building the building in is very congested. It's going to be like the roads are bad, there are potholes, there are stray dogs everywhere. And I started thinking, all these elderly people who live in this neighborhood, how do they go for walks? Their buildings are tiny. They don't have any play areas for children. They don't, and we were already expecting the children of the neighborhood would definitely join Latika Vihar. But now we're thinking, why don't we make the ramp open early in the morning for all the elderly people who would like to take a walk? And that gives them the access to a safe place where there won't be dogs. There's a clean bathroom. They can go up the ramp if they want, or they can just walk up and down the pavement. And we'll open it from 6 in the morning till 7:30 in the morning, and then the kids will start coming at that time. So we'll ask them to, finish their walk by then. But it would never have occurred to me if I didn't want to make sure that people were using the ramp, that we're putting so much effort and money into designing it. There are benches at every landing. So if somebody's tired, they can sit down. It's beautiful. It's quiet. And so that's what I mean, that when you're designing for access, it opens your mind as well. And that creates new possibilities. I wouldn't have thought of doing that until we built this ramp. So I think it's like, that's the kind of imagination that inclusion brings, that it forces you to think, well, how am I going to make this work for every child in this classroom? I've got 40 kids. Some of them are blind, some aren't hearing so well, some are mobility challenged, some are intellectually disabled. How are we going to make this work so it works for everybody? And you know how we always do it in our families. We've all got elderly people in our families. We've got people who can't eat a certain diet. We adapt. We have somebody who doesn't hear so well, we do it without even thinking about it, and we don't resent it because it's Daddy Ji or it's Mama Ji, and we just make those allowances. That's the thing that inclusion brings, and it's such a lovely trait of Indian families anyway, that it just brings that into society and helps us to think more creatively at that level.
And
Yeah.
so, yes, and I just wanted you to connect, what Joe was saying to the AHA event and the content book, because you're saying all you need to do is open up your mind and think from the point, like you said, think from the point, how is this accessible to people who may have a challenge accessing it, and then anyone can access it, right? So how did the event and the handbook, how do they, help create this sort of thinking?
Yeah, and I think also to what Joe was saying in terms of, I think the question that you asked was around the toys and the how do you kind of make things accessible. I think one of the things that we tried very hard was to figure out how do you make toys in which a person with disability is represented, right? How do you have characters? How do you have in print, for example? How do you make sure that they're represented? They're just not there anyway, especially in India, where none of the textbooks, have you opened the textbook? There's not a single textbook which shows a person with disability, right? Or anything, any material that's getting created. And with that in mind, we started kind of figuring out, okay, can textbooks, for example, or can the workbooks? So we work in the foundational literacy numeracy space, and there's a lot of investment right now for the workbooks that get created for children. And the ones that we created had images of children with disability, right? It's just we kept the same proportion. We said, hey, gender, girls, boys, individuals with disabilities, again, girls, boys. So you have 15% of the population, and therefore 15% of the pictures need to be individuals with disabilities, right? And that's important. I mean, we're pushing this with the SCRT. I don't know when it'll happen, but it's just so obvious. I mean, for me, it's difficult to understand that how can somebody not want to do something like this, which is, whether it's so a lot of stereotyping that we see, gender stereotyping, a lot of that is being spoken about now, but we're still not talking about representation. So when it comes to toys, it's, do you associate with, do you find yourself in that toy, right? And there was a beautiful so we work in Meghalaya, and we went and met one organization over there who's to make these toys, and these woven toys which looked, I mean, they dressed like individuals in Meghalaya, I mean, like girls in Meghalaya, the boys in Meghalaya. And for them that was such a sea change, because we all look very different, right? And that difference always keeps them apart. The Northeast, you will always see this belt who says that, India's never really accepted us. They always think we are either Chinese, or there are multiple connotations to what we say. And they actually created these dolls, which, so it's not just about it's about about your background, it's about the way that you dress, it's about the way you feel represented, and that has to reflect. And the new education policy talks about that all the time, but we are somehow not translating. The policies on one end, and everybody who's creating is coming from a space which is non-inclusive, and every third word in the NEP is inclusion, but when it really comes to putting that in paper, it's very, very difficult to do that. So how do you make sure that that happens when it comes to toys, when it comes to anything? I think the representation is key. It's not so much, it's not just the access. It's not like you can't say, oh, this car is not accessible. It's very difficult to have every toy accessible to everybody, right? And likes, dislikes. It's just that, do I see myself in this? Right? Am I represented in whatever is happening around me? Is there one picture which shows a child with disability anywhere in my environment? Right? So I think that's very, very crucial. And we did this also in the Mujkawa project, in our village PWD project around livelihood that we did. We've put posters around the village about what these individuals are doing, how they're earning money, what are the kind of solutions they're implementing. And that's what changes attitudes, right? That's what changes the way in which you start looking at individuals, because you come with a mindset that, oh, somebody with a disability is lesser than you. And I think that the day that we change that through our narratives, will create a sea change in the way that we work. So in the AHA event, we tried to do a similar thing. What we did is we bought content creators, and Jo was there for some time during that event. She took some time out. I know she was already at another event, and she came for some time for the AHA. We took content creators who are there from various organizations working in the mainstream foundation literacy numeracy space, and designed the space for them to think about different aspects of inclusion. So whether it's gender inclusion, whether it's individuals with disability, the kind of TLMs that can be created, which are accessible to all. And through those experiences, the idea is that, can you take this back and put it in the work that you do in whatever way that you want to? Once you have that in your mind, the hope is that you start thinking like this. It's almost like you can't unsee it, right? Once you've seen it, you can't unsee it. And that's the hope, that can we do enough of this with mainstream players? And our work has always been in that space. Everybody in the special needs space, organizations in that space, already have the the attitude to work or with individuals with disabilities. Where it doesn't exist is in the mainstream space. Until we don't change those attitudes, nothing's going to happen. We're always going to have segregated models. We'll always keep these our children outside. So I think that is something that we try to do with AHA, and we continue to do a lot of thinking around how we can do this. We work with organizations in mainstream spaces. So we work with Educate Girls, we work with Teach for India, we work with Akanksha, we work with Learning Language Foundation. So these are all the NGOs that we're working with and trying to figure out how can we build this, around this language around inclusion, so that it doesn't only belong to this sector. There is this sector versus that sector. There's a special needs sector, and then there is a mainstream sector. It's ridiculous that exists. How do you kind of bring those two together is really what we are trying to. It's a long way. It's a very, very long journey, but we're seeing more and more people accepting this now. More and more people who see the need to do it. Especially many of the organizations now that we are working with see the need for inclusion, and want to do something about it.
Yeah, I was just thinking about that representation. It's also a nice way to segue into people speaking for themselves, that we have gotten into the habit, particularly with intellectually disabled people, of speaking on their behalf. And there have been some wonderful videos. I don't know if you saw this one that was all over social media in March, which is when Down Syndrome Day is. And it's of this very feisty young woman with Down syndrome who basically tells everybody to go fuck themselves. She's like, you don't let me, you assume that I can't drink a margarita, so you don't give me a margarita, so I can't have a margarita, and she's being given a little thing of thumbs up or something. And then she says, "You parents, you assume that I can't live on my own, so I don't think I can live on my own. So I'm," and they're putting her to bed and they're putting a quilt over her and giving her a stuffed animal to sleep with. And, and she's basically saying, just assume I can, and then maybe I will. And she's like so angry about, and it's a girl with Down syndrome who's the one speaking. And we need more and more of that to make sure that we have people who are disabled working in our organizations, that they are, like when we were building the building, the architects were saying that the bathrooms for the staff didn't have to be accessible. I said, what? And he said, no, all the kids' areas, they'll be accessible, fully accessible. And I said, what if we have disabled staff? That's part of the reason to build the building. We haven't been able to hire as many disabled people as we want to because we're in this stupid house that is inaccessible. And now we can hire anybody. And he went, oh, you're right. And so it's like being this constant journey, but it's not his fault. Where has he seen an organization like ours where a disabled person is running it, where a disabled person is teaching the class, where, we're all guilty of these same kind of restrictions that we put on other people. We're speaking for them all the time. And this has been one of the biggest breakthroughs around the world, is disabled people speaking for themselves, and that nothing about us without us concept is so valuable. Don't speak on my behalf. You don't know what I want. You don't know what I think. And I think we're all learning that in this process as well.
Yeah, I think we've had similar experiences in our work in the urban employment program that we run. So we have a tie-up with Amazon, and we work across 5 cities, and we have this card that introduces the individual who comes in. It's a card to help the person introduce themselves. So it talks about their strengths, it talks about the disability that they have, it talks about the kind of support that they require, some of the hobbies that they have. So it kind of it's an introductory card that they take to the organization, and they introduce themselves and talk about their disability. We have individuals with disabilities whom we've employed in our organization. So one of our boy who's doing graphic designing has intellectual disability, and he speaks so openly about it. So the first day that he came in, we'd obviously sensitize the staff in terms of him coming in, and what are some of the things they should think of when they're talking to him, the kind of if you want to instruct him, what are some of the things you should think of. But it didn't really matter, because he just took on everybody. He went and spoke to everybody. He just got along with everybody so well that nobody felt that, oh, I need to follow these 4 things to talk to him. This whole thing where we have that, oh, when you talk with somebody with intellectual disability, here are the 3 things that you should remember. It doesn't work like that in real life, right? It never does. And if you give that freedom, and if you give that space for that person to talk, and introduce himself, I think, and share the challenges that that person is facing. And after he did the introduction, we started this initiative internally, which is called Uniquely You. So all our staff members share their life's journey. We have this sort of weekly basis. Every 1 or 2 people share the life's journey, and you can see the kind of struggles and challenges that they've gone through. So disability is just one of the ways in which you think about challenges, but everybody's gone through their own journey. And because we started this with him, we realized that this will be so valuable, because nobody talks. We don't really know the people we work with. Nobody talks about these things. Right? And then everybody started so this initiative has become a great way of knowing the person a little more, knowing that everybody has a different set of challenges, and just uniquely you just fits into that space.
Sonali, I wanted to tie in to the leading to the next question, to a point that you said, that there is some movement that is happening towards the mainstream, and also to tie the conversation together, that one way is by introducing language that opens up our minds to access. And Joe, like you said, reimagining those physical barriers that then lead to mental barriers in the ways in which we imagine access. Also, when you spoke about representation, I was thinking it is not only the fact that they are represented, but also like how are they represented. Like you said, Joe, they're not represented like a bechara, but they're represented as individuals who can speak up for themselves and who can define their own identities and who they are. And these are not necessarily um, tied in with what other people think of them, and what, say, things they are not able to do because of certain disabilities they have. Rather, they want to define themselves by what they are able to do and what they want to do. So all of these things, when we see these slowly trickling down, there is like some sort of a shift happening towards the mainstream. And we've covered a little bit about say what is happening with, say, creating spaces that allow everyone to access, and having education ministers take oaths of inclusion. Do you want to add on to that, to just think about what else is needed in addition to what is happening, and if you somewhere see technology playing a role in this?
Should I go? Yeah. So I think one of the things we realized when we started thinking of how do we take this to more and more people, right? And we understood that as an organization, we don't understand scale. We don't understand what it means to have scalable solutions. So that's the first thing that we learned with many mainstream organizations that we worked in terms of how do you design for scale. When you're going to the government and you're saying, here's the solution, and I've done this with 50 children, it makes zero sense to them. They have 5 lakh children in remote areas, in the most difficult circumstances, in infrastructure and areas where there are no roads, there is nothing at all. And when you go with a solution saying that I've done this with 50, it never works, right? So understanding the way the mainstream functions and therefore aligning what you do to that is extremely important for us to make any movement. It's very easy to become somebody who's right based, and we've seen this in the work that we do, that we in fact had, so we, in any state that we work with, we get in other partners, and whenever we've seen this right based partner which comes in, there's nothing wrong with that. But the challenge is you're not giving the solution, you're only questioning the status quo. If you're able to give the solution and say, hey, this is a problem and I have the solution for it, or I'm willing to work with you on the solution, then the government will do everything that they can. And contrary to our belief, where we feel that, oh, the government doesn't want to do anything, they want to do so much. If you are able to give them a solution that works in the way that they function, you can't expect them to function in a way that you do at your centers or at your organizations. You need to understand what they require. So I think that was a huge learning curve for us. It took a lot of time, a lot of heartbreaks, a lot of challenges that we faced along the way, because it was frustrating. You're like, why can't you do this? But you don't know how much it takes to get that one thing done, how many files need to be passed, how many budget items need to be put in for you to just get that one little change at a state level. So I think for us, it's been a huge learning in terms of the patience that you need to have, the understanding that you need to have of core programs, the alignment that you need to do, and the skill set that you need to do. And I think technology plays a huge role in this, because somewhere in the special education space, this is not something that's taught to special educators. So in their courses, they're never taught pedagogy. They're not taught what is the national education policy. It has nothing to do with the mainstream education. It's all taught on how do you teach a child 1-to-1, or how do you teach a ratio of 1-to-8, and that's what you go with to a mainstream teacher and try to explain that teacher. And the teacher saying, listen, this is not going to work. I have 40 kids with diverse needs. It's a multi-grade classroom. Tell me, come here, show me how I can solve this. But the special educator can't solve it, because she doesn't have that experience, she doesn't have that knowledge to be able to do it. So I think some of the things that we're trying to solve for this gap is, we're two things. One is we have an app for screening, which helps children at risk for disability, nutrition and health get screened very early. Tamil Nadu has adopted the app. Now, of course, there is Prashast, which the government has also come up with. And in Tamil Nadu, however, it's slightly different. It's universal screening. So every child gets screened every year for health, disability, and nutrition. So it's a little more holistic than the way Prashast has looked at, because in Prashast, you leave it up to the teacher who she wants to assess. So there's a big difference in terms of the way it'll get used. but nevertheless, there is a solution that is there. The second thing that we are now building is a chatbot, which hopefully will give these answers to the teachers. We realize these one-time trainings that we do gives very little knowledge, right? It's more focused on attitudinal change than knowledge. You have 21 disabilities now. How is anybody going to remember? The special educators themselves don't have knowledge about 21 disabilities, and you're expecting the teacher to have it. So can the bot work in a way where the teacher can ask these questions and of things that she actually needs in the class? I have somebody with low vision. How can I teach that child reading? I have somebody with reading difficulties. What are some of the things that I can do? The child is not able to sit in the class. What is it that what can I do for this child? So we're trying to build a solution. It's harder than what we thought it would be, because there's so many layers to all this. But hopefully, we hope that we are able to bring these kind of solutions, which is an easy access. So it's a WhatsApp bot. It's something that can be used either by a special educator or by a teacher, but will give the answers to whatever extent it will, to help them there and then, right? And not wait for, where am I going to find this expert to answer this? And I know a lot of other organizations are using, like I know Naidisha is using, has also, we've been talking to Naidisha for a long time, sharing our learnings from each other. They've also have a chatbot for parents, which now helps them answer questions about how to get a disability certificate, how to get it. So a lot of this information which lies with the special education sector needs to be democratized and needs to be put out there and easily available to people free of cost, so that they can use this and not depend on specialists every time. I think that's the big barrier we have, that for every little question we are waiting for the specialist to answer. And it doesn't work like that in real life. In remote areas, even in semi-urban areas, you're never going to find these specialists. So technology, I think, will play a more and more important role as we move ahead. I know many organizations who are working in assistive tech, which has made a sea change of a difference for people with mobility challenges, with hearing, with vision. I just heard yesterday, I saw a video of Apple Pods, which can be used as hearing devices now. I think technology is going to change the way we perceive and work in the space of disability. It's going to democratize and reduce costs drastically. Hearing aids. So they were talking about the cost of hearing aid versus these pods, and there is a huge difference. It's also more acceptable if you're using this, because I mean, again, and it's using AI. It's picking up your signals and it's learning as it's learning how best you can hear through this AI. I'm not saying AI is the best. There are many, many challenges to it, but certainly many, many new things which are coming, from those Google glasses to your hearing aids, which are coming in, which are mainstream. I somehow, as an organization, our belief that these solutions should be created by mainstream players is, I think, very, very strong, because only when they take ownership will we be able to solve the problem. Us as a specialized organization, going to them is just going to be me giving a product to you, right? You don't care about it. It's just one of the things you're doing. But when you develop it yourself, or when you take ownership of it, it's going to make a huge difference. And one of the examples I think I always give people is aviation industry. If you look at the aviation industry and the way wheelchairs are being used by elderly, by the individuals with disabilities, there is no special educator sitting over there, right? It's done by the department themselves. You now have accessibility because the aviation ministry took ownership of it, right? And they may be doing whatever trainings they may be doing, but you don't hear. It's not like a special education organization who's running this. It's the aviation industry who's running it, and we need more and more such initiatives coming in from mainstream players, because only then will they think of inclusion. You going is going to be, you're giving them a plug-in which is beyond their solution. But again, this will make them think inclusion first. So yeah, lots of hope that lot of things can move with technology for sure.
Joe, your thoughts?
I think that there's a strong economic incentive that is moving a lot of these things. That the the market is realizing that disabled people are a force. And if you think about how gay people have moved into the mainstream of society, much of it was economic. They were a lot of gay people, at least in the West, were people who were childless and well educated and very creative. And they were seen as an economic segment that many, like the travel industry, wanted, the clothing industry wanted. And so there was an acceptance simply because we have to market to them and we want their money. And, whatever it takes, like if that's what it takes to get disability into the mainstream, let's see how that will benefit everybody, because so many more gay people have been able to come out and be themselves, and legislation has passed as a result. And I think that the same thing is likely to happen with disability. You talk about aviation industry um, getting it and starting to make the necessary changes, but why? Because more and more disabled people wanted to travel, and they demanded it, and they said, look, we can't fly on these planes unless you get us to the plane, and there's a way to help us to get into our seat. We've got the money, we want to travel, but make it happen. And that's exactly what began to happen. And you see cars that are adapted now for disabled people to use them. You see so many fantastic changes in technology because it's a market demand. And then the more people start to buy it, the cheaper it becomes and the more accessible to more and more. And, there were so many products that were designed specifically for disabled people, which have become mainstream. I don't know if have you ever had those tools, those kitchen tools? They're called, it's an OXO is the brand. And yeah, I do too, Sonali. But they're designed for a person who had arthritis, and she and her husband designed this for her. And it's now like all over America. Every tool you want, whether it's a peeler or a pair of scissors, and it's called Good Grip, and it's just designed in a particular way that is so fun to use. Almost all of my kitchen utensils are these OXO brand, and that's how we start to see these changes happen, because now it's mandated in the law that the Indian National Building Code is a work of art. I love it. It is so good. Nobody follows it, but it's fantastic. So, that kind of thing is going to change the way buildings are created. If we can get rid of the corruption that people just pay the guy and don't do it, that will make big changes happen. In America, happened the same way. Buildings are all accessible now. You cannot have a building that doesn't follow the National Building Code in America. So it's this kind of thing, I think, is what will really make the changes. And then people like us who have expertise in so many different fields, like in education, in textbooks, in assistive devices, we're going to be coming in to provide the technology expertise for it. So I think lots to hope for, a lot of things that are going very well, and we just need to keep building on them, make sure that disabled people are front and center and making their demands known.
Okay, any closing comments, recommendations? Recommendations can be books, movies, documentaries, articles that you've recently read and you would like to share.
This is my favorite book. I want everybody to read this. It's by Sara Hendren, and it is about design and access. And wow, it is a game changer. I bought 12 copies of this book for various people. I mean, you can't get it on Amazon. I keep telling them more copies, more copies. So every now and then they'll add 2 more copies and say only 2 left, and I buy them immediately and give them to people that I want to be influenced by it. That's my big.
Can we just read out the title?
Yeah, it's called What Can a Body Do? How We Meet the Built World by Sara Hendren. She is a visionary. She has worked a lot with disabled people and learned so much from them. And look at how many Post-it notes I've got in here. It's just full of my comments, and I'm constantly going back to it. Fantastic book.
I think I read extremely boring books. I just read I just read articles and I just do research and other work that we do. And something that I'm working on from the last, I think, last 2 months is understanding climate change and disability. And that's another area that so much is missing in. They're the ones
Yeah.
affected by disability the most, and we're doing a workshop now in Meghalaya which is called Tackling Climate Change Through Sustainable Livelihoods for People with Disability. We're doing it with all ministries in Meghalaya, and the idea is to kind of bring this to the notice and say that, hey, the disaster management plans don't work. Climate solutions need to be thought through when it comes to people with disabilities. So that's something that I'm trying to understand, a very new space for us. But because we are in the space of livelihood and in the farm, non-farm solutions that we are creating, how can we make for us, the theory is that if they are the ones who are most affected, they should be taking the lead and creating these solutions, and the rest should follow. So yeah, that's something that
The
I feel is.
author Sonali.
I've been reading various research articles. I think there was one by
Okay.
CBL. I remember there's one recent one which is IFAD in Meghalaya, who's doing a climate project. Doesn't have people with disabilities included yet. So the
Okay.
IFAD document on Meghalaya is very interesting. And we're so we've reached out to a lot of climate experts to help us understand. So we've reached out to multiple climate experts through Nudge, through IDR, to understand if the kind of efforts that are happening in India, are they including people with disabilities? I know the answer, but I want to hear it from them and not assume certain things.
I have one
Thank
more comment to make.
Sure.
I want to compliment you, Sana, on your fantastic facilitation. It's been really a pleasure to be part of this and to thank you for bringing Sonali and me together. We don't get a chance to really know what the other one is doing. I'm amazed at all the things that you guys have branched into and the number of states you're involved in. It's staggering and really exciting and inspiring. So I'm thrilled that we got the chance to connect like this. And thank you
Thank you
for
so
I,
that.
much.
I
Same
also
for
have to say that the credit also goes to Bachpan Manao and
Yes,
Varun
yes,
for putting this
absolutely.
together. Yeah.
absolutely, absolutely. I
But
That's
think
what brought us together the last.
I'm always very starstruck with Joe, and I'm so happy that we're sharing this platform. I
Same
know it
thing
was.
with me, Sonali. I just am in awe of all the things you do. And just the way you casually say, "Oh yeah, and we're in Meghalaya, and we're in here, and we've got Amazon, and we've got so exciting." It's just wonderful.
Lovely. I think it's been a wonderful. I was worried about this podcast in terms of how it's going to really look like, but I'm so glad you've done a
Yeah, it
fabulous
was
job.
great.
yeah,
Really well
yeah.
done.
I really
Thank you.
enjoyed it.
Thank you. Thank you so much for making the time. I really enjoy. I learned so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks very much.